Get the Angel Reese special at McDonald's now. Let's break it down. My favorite barbecue sauce, American cheese, crispy bacon, pickles, onions, and a sesame seed bun, of course. And don't forget the fries and a drink. Sound good? Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
At participating restaurants for a limited time.
This episode is brought to you by Atlassian. Atlassian makes the team collaboration software that powers enterprise businesses around the world, including over 80% of the Fortune 500. With Atlassian's AI-powered software like Jira, Confluence, and Loom, you'll have more time to do the work that matters. In fact, Atlassian customers experience a 25% reduction in project duration per year. Unleash the potential of your team at Atlassian.com. Atlassian.
I'm Stephen Metcalf, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest. Congrats, you finally got your Severance edition. It's Wednesday, February 19th, 2025. On today's show, Severance, the Apple TV show, has returned for a second season, belatedly, we should note, after 3 years, I think, away. It stars Adam Scott as an upper-middle manager at a sinister and mysterious firm where certain employees completely, quote-unquote, sever their work and home consciousnesses. You effectively become two distinct people with no memory, each with no memory of the other. It also stars Britt Lauer, John Turturro, and we get a lot of Christopher Walken, too, as a bonus. And then No Other Land has been nominated for Best Feature Documentary for this year's Oscars. It's a joint production of Israeli and Palestinian filmmakers whose cameras captured the forced displacement of families from the West Bank over a 4-year period. There's also a ton of archival footage. Virtually the entire film, in effect, the bulk of the entire film was filmed pre-October 7th, for what it's worth. And finally, the odd but also oddly resonant, maybe, fate of BuzzFeed. We'll discuss, but first I'm joined by Dana Stevens, the film critic for Slate. Hey, Dana.
Greetings, Steve.
And filling in for Julia this week, we're grateful to have Nitish Pawa, the tech reporter for Slate. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. So happy to be here.
Oh, how to even describe the TV show Severance. Many of you are no doubt familiar with it, but if you are, cast your mind back to episode 1 and how alienating and strange it was. A woman wakes up on a conference table in a glaringly white windowless room. She has no idea where she is, but also she really has close to no idea who she is or how she got there. This is the new innie her. That is, she has agreed to have her work consciousness completely severed from her out-of-work consciousness. So her out-of-work self is her outie, her in-work self is her innie. They are now two distinct consciousnesses. One has no relationship or memory of the other. Thus begins a weird, wild, psychological, dystopian thriller, come workplace comedy? Question mark, how to describe this show? Well, we'll get to it in our discussion anyway. The show follows a team of 4 data workers. Adam Scott is the team leader. Britt Lauer is the new innie, as described above. John Turturro plays a grizzled veteran. And Zach Cherry is the wisecracking cynic. So we're going to do something a little unexpected. We're actually going to play a clip from the very opening of season 1, episode 1, in part just to remind everyone of how disorienting the show was before you learned all of its, opaque mythologies. But also for those of you who haven't seen it, it probably will give you a feel for how weird it starts before it begins to build out its world. Let's have a listen.
Hi there. You on the table? I wonder if you'd mind taking a brief survey.
Who is that?
5 questions. Now, I know you're sleepy, but I just bet it'll make you feel right as rain.
Who's speaking? Hey! Open the door!
Nitish, where are you? I mean, this is a show that it's peculiar. It can be just it's all about sort of strategic disorientation. It's a bit of a wild, but also in its funny way, soporific and purgatorial ride. I'm very curious to know what you make of it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, for some reason, this show has immediately clicked with me. I don't know, maybe it's like the Succession follow-up I needed that's a little more tech dystopian, as it were. But it, I think, captures something about what, like, a fundamental truth of like work, labor that, you know, is sometimes hard for us to accept when it's so much of our identities, which is that we really would sometimes just like to unplug and just like kind of do it blindly, maybe not remember everything we do in our lives as a result of what we were working on. And I think it's represented so well in the shows, like the work that they actually do. They just sit down at these computers, they're putting numbers into these little buckets. And of course, it also shows the limits of trying to figure out this severing solution where it's like eventually, you know, the innies, they are human beings who are inquisitive and curious by nature and are going to try to figure out like why they're in there in the first place and what they're even doing, what they're here for. But there is something about that fantasy of just like completely distancing yourself from the drudgery of labor that I think it hits. It connects in a certain way.
Dana, what about you? Is this a show that you connected with for season 1 right when it was dropping and have stuck with, or did you do like me a big but sort of happily gorging bingey catch up?
Well, I mean, first of all, I should say that this is the first show in a long time that I have been waiting for the return of, like a sailor's widow staring out to sea. Like, I think probably Better Call Saul was the last show that I felt that about, of just like actual deprivation until the next season would drop. And so I'm very, very happy it's back. And, you know, I'm fully caught up and anxiously waiting for episode 6 of season 2 now. And I was trying to think about why that is, watching these first 5 episodes. Like, I really think this is the best show on TV right now for me. And it reminds me of why TV is good. We watch so much TV for this podcast, and many things are, amusing, intriguing. Sometimes I stick with them. Sometimes I don't. But there are very few shows to me as a more movie person that give me that feeling of like, I must have it. And I think it's just because this show it feels smarter than the viewer most of the time, and that is not to say I'm some smarty pants who every single show is too dumb for or something, but there's so many shows where I feel like there's one place where you're cutting corners, or you're saying, well, that plot point didn't really make sense, or this wasn't so well written, or this character isn't quite defined, but I'm going with it because overall I like the feeling of the show. This show, no, I feel like it's really on point. It has a style, a visual style that's extremely specific to this show, right? It has a voice in the dialogue. Like, I was noting down all these kind of felicities of language, the strange way that people talk that's sort of proper to this show. And it's very funny, but there's also a certain kind of formality or strangeness to it. There's a scene, I think this is in the first episode of this new season, where one character says, "Holy shit," and the other character says, "The holiest." And it's just such a bizarre little bit of dialogue. So it's full of these little felicities of language like that. It's a show that's really concerned with details. So even if I'm not quite sure, or nobody could be sure right now what's going on with the big overarching mystery that they're trying to solve, it kind of seems to keep getting more confusing with each episode. But I don't feel like this show is on a lost trajectory, like the show Lost, right? Where it's throwing out so many interesting ideas that it kind of loses its way and ultimately is unsatisfying. I have a feeling, and the show creator and runner, one of the main writers, Dan Erickson, has said this, that, the main plot points are kind of mapped out. They know where the mystery is going to go. So there's two things going on at once. There's what Nitish was talking about, the kind of metaphor for capitalism that the entire Lumon industry stands for. And then there's this cosmological, possibly supernatural, possibly it's just about a cult. We don't quite know. But, there's this ideology, almost a cult-like ideology that's driving Lumon Industries that we're learning a little bit more about with each episode. And then, of course, nested within all of that, you have a workplace comedy, a really touching, sweet workplace comedy about 4 colleagues who are, trapped in this hellish altered dimension, but who are also still just trying to sort of solve their daily problems and solve their interpersonal problems. And I just love those four characters that Adam Scott, Britt Lauer, John Turturro, and Zach Cherry play. The actors are all perfectly cast. I don't know. I mean, I love this show. I think it's going interesting places this season. What about you, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in this weird position. So I hadn't watched season 1. I started it, I watched the pilot, didn't connect with it at all and dropped it. And then, like everyone else in the world, started hearing all kinds of buzzy things about season 2 and what a relief it was to have the show back to its fans, but also how revelatory and expansive it was of the original premise. And I was like, okay, we decided to do that. So I binged it, caught up with it. And I'm in this odd position of finding the workplace, the sort of work-life balance satire flat, in part because it's untimely. COVID completed a collapse that was well underway anyway, whereby work and life have fallen into one another. The more pointed satire is about how inescapable work is. It's sort of omnipresent and pseudo-leisurely in a way that actually is more, in its funny way, I mean, not to debase this word, but enslaving or somehow reductive of our overall freedom. So it's satire in that regard, to me, is very flat in some sense. And also, I'm intrigued by the kind of cultish, perhaps quasi, as you say, Dana, supernatural, overarching edifice of the show, right? That we don't know what this company Lumen does other than sever these workers, place them in this weird purgatorial, radically dehumanized office. And the visual of it, if you haven't seen the show, is very striking. The four of them are clustered at a kind of 4-station cubicle-like thing, but otherwise the room is completely empty, right? Whereas typically it would be filled with dozens and dozens of those. It's just that one as a kind of island, which just emphasizes how perverse and weirdly isolated the four are on that little island with their workstations. But we don't know much about Lumen, but we get these weird little cultish glimpses, and I find them tantalizing. But I'm not convinced that the show doesn't have a lost trajectory to it, because they're so that they keep teasing and teasing and teasing, but you're not really getting a lot yet, right? So there's sort of odd excursions into unmapped parts of the office or previously unmapped parts of the office where they find, I don't want to give it away, but very strange landscapes, humanscapes and landscapes. And we're sort of getting inexplicability heaped upon inexplicability in a way that makes me worry that the payoff is going to have to be on such a scale that it's impossible to provide it. But here's why this is all weird. Is I love the show and I can't wait for there to be more of the show. And I think you nailed it, Dana. There's that funny moment at the beginning of season 2 where they appear to have fired Adam Scott's 3 coworkers, the ones that we got to know in season 1. And of course, one plausible reaction to this is, oh my God, thank God they escaped. I love those guys. They're out of this horrible, tormenting situation that they should never have consented to in the first place. But of course, as a viewer, that's not what you're thinking at all. You're like, I want my buddies back. I want Adam Scott's buddies. Like, I want the workplace comedy. Like, you don't recast Seinfeld. He doesn't get new neighbors after season 1. You're like, no fucking way. Like, get them back. And when they're all, it doesn't spoil anything. You say at the end of episode 1 of season 2, they're all seated in this horrible, like they're all back at that horrible isolated cluster in the middle of that office doing God knows what. They're not even sure, in this situation that all of them regard as soul destructive in the extreme. And how does the viewer feel? You're like, the team's back together again, right? Like great, bring it on, give me more. To me, what's utterly gripping and totally works about this show is the weirdness of the severance itself. It's right there in the title. And you see this discrepancy over and over again, principally with the Adam Scott character through season 1, and into season 2, you start to get the other characters. But you see the effects of having 2 separate people with completely distinct consciousnesses. And his backstory is a mournful one. It's kind of a grief story for him. And he's trying to work through this grief by cutting away a part of himself. And that to me has enormous amounts of pathos. And then what it's like when a romantic spark occurs between people in the innie world, and what the consequences of knowing that that's forever quarantined in this weird no man's land. To me, all of that works completely. So surely at the level of plot, like I don't even need a huge payoff. I need all these little payoffs. What's going to happen to these four people? I think it's a really terrific show. What about you, Nitish? Do you sort of feel as though this is like it's so much setup, and they're delaying the big payoff, and so there's more setup, and finally, like it's just not going to be able to pay out? Or do you think that they're onto something?
I mean, I think that's a very fair concern to have. I do think one thing the show is very good at is giving you little payoffs along the way that do kind of like keep you hooked a little bit more until like the next revelation, like without, getting into spoilers, obviously. I mean, they're like, so far, I feel like we've gotten some pretty good fill in so far on the nature of certain characters, like teased at and now more fleshed out, like romantic relationships and feelings for one another. We're getting like more of a sense of how extended and just like bizarre the Lumen universe is. Like we are at this point much farther away from the central office setting and more into like the various tentacles that the company has in all aspects of life, even outside where the innies are at. And we're also, I think, getting, especially in this season, some nice new character development with like the bosses and the people behind Lumen kind of running this whole thing. And so, yeah, I think it is reasonable to worry that ultimately, like, there's going to be way too much to explain, and maybe like some of it never gets addressed, and we'll never know what was going on with the goats, say. But I think so far they've done at least a decent job to me of keeping me like satisfied with, okay, here's a little a morsel for you. Like here, you can learn a little bit more about this as a treat, and now we're gonna go into this next step. And I think that's part of what is so gripping about the show, what keeps us hooked. And I think we also shouldn't underestimate that, I don't know, this show is like very well resourced, like tens of millions of dollars go into each episode, and it's apparently a big payoff for Apple. So I mean, they're not going to be lacking for ways to figure out how to realize everything, I think.
I mean, because you mentioned the resources that go into the show, I just want to just add that I think part of what makes the show have this distinctive visual style is how many great real locations it uses. Right? Like the Lumon building is an actual building in New Jersey. It was the Bell Laboratories building. It was built by Eero Saarinen in 1962. Like it's this kind of iconic space that they're moving through, right? That feels really, really real. And the same thing with the now I think infamous fourth episode of this second season, which we can't spoil anything about, but it takes place outside of Lumon in a real forest. And if you read a bit about the filming process for that show, they really did have to ship all this equipment out via snowcat type, vehicles into the middle of a forest. And the actors are really walking around in the middle of nowhere in the snow. And the feeling of loneliness and isolation in those two spaces, the Lumon building and then that snow episode, it's so palpable and tangible. What the snow episode reminded me of in a way, in terms of it being a sort of side quest of some of the main characters, was the famous Pine Barrens episode of The Sopranos when Paulie and Christopher are out alone, right, out in the freezing woods. There's a similar sense that you're kind of taking these known characters and putting them in a different outdoor landscape, and it's almost video game style, like they have to survive this quest.
And you also very much like see their id, right? Like in Pine Barrens, you saw Paulie and Christopher like near the point of breakdown, basically until like Tony and the rest of the crew came in to finally bail them out of where they were at. But you see them like consuming ketchup packets for sustenance and like misunderstanding like they got Czechoslovakians here, you just see them down to their bare weirdest essence. And I think the Severance episode also does a good job of that with the characters. We see them acting out in extremely bizarre ways that you probably would not have seen elsewhere.
And it kind of amplifies the meaning and the symbolism, too. Like, I feel like the second season is expanding the metaphor of severance beyond just being about work-life balance. It's really starting to be about identity and who you are in different parts of your life. I mean, we can't get into more than that without really spoiling some stuff. But I feel like some of the questions about identity and internal division that are starting to be asked in the second season are getting even deeper and more sort of psychological than they were, maybe sociological in the first season.
Yeah, I think I agree with that.
Well, no doubt we'll keep an eye on where those go. The show's Severance. It's on Apple TV. Check it out. Who doesn't love the good things in life? Everyone enjoys a little luxury, but it's not always affordable, except when it comes to Quince. Quince is the go-to for luxury essentials at affordable prices. Dana, are you wearing Quince today?
I just so happened to be, and I wanted you to ask me about that because this was not planned. I didn't know they had an ad on the show. I just wanted to put on a cute, cozy sweater on a freezing cold day, and so I'm wearing a Quince cashmere turtleneck. That's sort of, Steve's not in the studio with me today, so he can't see the color, but it's this great, one of my favorite colorways, kind of like a dusty pink, sort of like a dark Band-Aid color. They have a lot of cashmere items in beautiful colors. Cashmere and silk, to me, are some of the main fabrics you'll find there, although they make all kinds of basics in different fabrics. But yeah, this is a Quince basic for me, and I really, really like their stuff.
Yeah, as do I. I mean, the best part, all their items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. So give yourself the luxury you deserve with Quince. Go to quince.com/culture for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/culture to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/culture.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
No Other Land has been nominated for Best Feature Documentary this forthcoming Oscars. The film is a collaboration between two Israeli and two Palestinian filmmakers. Two of those four, the Palestinian activist Basil Adra and the Israeli journalist Yuval Abraham, are the two principal on-screen presences in the movie, at least among the four filmmakers. Adra, the Palestinian, comes from the Masafar Yatta region of the West Bank. It's a collection of about 20 Palestinian villages being cleared away in favor of an Israeli military outpost. Adra is in possession of a huge archive of videos filmed by his family and neighbors documenting a 20-year process of destruction and displacement. But not only that, his whole life is a trove of such memories. His very first one is being woken up as his father, an activist, was being arrested. What follows over the course of the 90-minute movie or so is verite and close to the ground as it possibly gets, an attempt to strip away competing narratives, historical backstories, and simply record what is happening as Adra and Abraham form a working alliance and a tentative friendship. The clip for the film we're going to play is the film's trailer. Let's have a listen.
Thousand Palestinians face one of the single biggest expulsion decisions since the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories began.
هاي قصة عن القوة.
أنا اسمي باسل.
مسافر يطا هي المكان اللي كبرت فيه. بداية تصويري هي بداية نهايتنا.
جرافات؟
Dana, let me start with you. I mean, in both superficial and not so superficial ways, this reminds me of 20 Years in Mariupol, the film about the Russian invasion of Ukraine from a few years ago. It's incredibly powerful document that in some ways is hard to evaluate as a film. You're not really meant, I think, to think of it in aestheticized terms. You are a film critic. It is a movie. It's a feature documentary. Talk about it as a movie, but also, of course, as an active witness.
Yeah, you're right that 20 Days in Mariupol is something that comes to mind in the sense that they're these documents filmed on the ground. They're both very hard to watch. They both have a real sense of immediacy, and they also both have very deeply encoded into the film storytelling a sense on the part of the filmmakers of this kind of fear of futility, right? I mean, that's something that comes up over and over again in No Other Land is the sense between this Israeli journalist and this Palestinian activist who become sort of friends. It's an uneasy friendship. We should talk about that. But they bond over the course of making this movie and trying to get the word out. And yet they're constantly despairing that it's not working. You know, I mean, as Basil Adric keeps pointing out, he is now in the second generation of activism. His own father was involved in all kinds of widely televised actions during his childhood, none of which have made any difference. I mean, the villages are continuing to be methodically attacked by the IDF. So watching this movie, and it's interesting to read different critics on it, could be seen as an act of hope in the sense that the word is sort of getting out, though the movie doesn't have distribution in the U.S. yet, right? So there's a lot of question as to how sincere that effort to get out the word really is on the part of the film industry. But also, so people watch it and so what, right? I mean, that sense of like generations go by as we witness these cycles of violence and nothing is being done about it. And as you pointed out in your intro to the show, Steve, all this was before the October 7th, 2023 attacks. So the kind of violence that we're looking at is not on the scale of what's happening in Gaza right now. It's not big bombardments from, American weaponry, basically. It's you really see this sort of day-to-day grind of occupation and small actions that still manage to be incredibly violent, like filling wells with concrete. You see that happen at one point, right? Just essentially the IDF coming in and making these constant small incursions that sort of keep Palestinian life from having any sense of the everyday and of the normal. Yeah. Seeing a family, for example, have their house bulldozed, the people all get out of the house in time, but then they have to set up their lives in a cave, and you're watching them sort of wire a cave for electricity so they can live in it. And all this is just very matter-of-factly presented, right? It's very different than watching a place under bombardment to see this kind of lo-fi violence taking place.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what's really effective and powerful about this movie is how just like ordinary seeming like just how down to the everyday necessities, as you were saying, Dana, all the like repression of the Palestinians in the West Bank is presented. I mean, you see, the people being displaced from their homes, taking out their rugs, just simple trinkets to see like, memories of their home, and, hopefully they can set up somewhere else. There's all those scenes where Basil, one of the Palestinian filmmaker, is going up to the IDF soldiers and saying like, "I'm filming you. I'm here. People are going to know about this." And it almost feels more like a plea than even like a threat. Like, no, look, I'm going to expose you to the world. It's more like, look, I'm putting this on the record that this is what you are responsible for. But you also see that the soldiers themselves don't care.
At one point they mock him. They say, why don't you go write an article about it? Right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, get some views. And yeah, that sense of like hopelessness is very definitely pervasive. But what I find also invigorating about it is that even though they talk about that, even though, their friendship is very uneasy and strained, I liked early on in the documentary when one of the West Bank residents tells Yuval, is like, "Oh, you're one of those human rights Israelis, huh?" But it's like they still try. They know they have no choice but to keep doing this, documenting it for posterity, showing off the injustices happening here, and now how they're only getting worse. I mean, recently, leading up to the Oscars and with the new Trump administration and what's been going on with Netanyahu and the ceasefire, they're once again decrying, like, look, settler attacks are ramping up in the West Bank again. There's this plan now to expel the population of Gaza and, like, quote unquote, take it over. Like, this is unbelievable. Like, sure, you can give us an Oscar nomination, but what are you, world viewer going to do about it?
Right, which is why one both wants this movie to get an Oscar, right, so that it will get that recognition and spread the word, and also in a way not, because it just seems like an even more hollow victory. And I'm not sure that I agree with Sam Adams, who wrote for Slate, that this movie seems like a shoo-in for the Best Documentary Oscar. I mean, it has been garnering critics awards and festival awards everywhere it's gone because it's such a powerful testament. But I just feel like it's probably too politically divisive, and there's too much pro-Israeli sentiment, or at least a wing of that in Hollywood, for this movie to maybe take that award.
Yeah. Dana, we were talking about this before the recording, but I mean, like, even Jonathan Glazer last year accepting the award for Zone of Interest. Yeah.
Right?
And, just making, like, a very, like, small allusion to what's going on in Gaza, what was going on at that time, and saying that, like, this, atrocities should not be done in our name as, Jewish people, got, like, weeks of outrage and blowback. It was unbelievable. So, yeah, I would not be surprised if for that reason this got, once again, kind of buried a little bit.
Well, I'm not sure I have a lot to add. You guys covered it so beautifully. I mean, I would say that the movie is a reminder that hell, in addition to being pain and torment, is also boredom and repetition. That like a distinctive feature of eternal torment is the knowledge of futility that comes with it in some sense. And the curious thing about the movie is just it is the same thing over and over again. It's basically it's a series of repetitive, kind of almost ritualistic events. I mean, there are varieties of details, some of which are highly specific and heartbreaking, which we'll talk about in a second. But and to the extent that there's any progress over it, it's towards a feeling of exhaustion on the part of the two featured filmmakers, the fraying of their own friendship at moments, and a diminishing sense of hope. I mean, the movie, there are brief snippets post October 7th, and at that point, the ability of this cluster of villages to survive anything like a continuous settlement of Palestinians is threatened, if not completely destroyed. So it's very, very painful. I mean, how do you pick out a single image? I mean, the one that it's all tearing at your heart. At the same time, the movie, as you guys say, reminds you constantly your own internal subjective response to it ultimately is unimportant unless it motivates meaningful action. But what would that action be? So it's this sort of double heartbreak of feeling, wounded on behalf of someone else while knowing that you are only participating in their futility by reducing your response to a response of sensibility, aesthetic sensibility, right? Like but the image that stays with me is there are children in a classroom towards the end of the film. The Israeli soldiers are approaching, and these kids, they're just fucking kids in a classroom, and they just begin gathering these toy balls and throwing them in a bag because they know they're going to leave, and they just want to bring the pretty colored balls with them. And then, of course, the image of families relocated in caves, and I think that that's absolutely right. It's like the extraordinary need for the ordinary to prevail, right? And how heroic it is for unheroic details of life to recreate themselves, for example, in a cave. What can one say? I mean, it has no U.S. distributor. It's probably not going to win I kind of think won't win the Oscar for the reasons alluded to, but it's a movie people should see. But there has to be, and God knows what it is at this point, but some second step beyond this whereby change and salvation is possible. But fuck knows what that is, right, at this point. So even though no other land doesn't have a U.S. distributor, it is in select movie houses in select cities. It is possible to find, and hopefully it will be streaming before too long.
بيكون كثير حلو إذا بصير استقرار. بعدين أنتوا بتيجوا تزوروني مش أنا بزوركم ولا لا؟ ممكن. ولا شو تفكر؟ لو أنت مكاني شو تفكر؟
When you check out at the pharmacy, you see the journey from idea to medicine, thanks to our intellectual property system, or IP for short. IP safeguards inventions, like a new way to prevent seizures or lower cholesterol. And IP supports competition from other brands. Then, lower cost generics, which are 90% of prescriptions filled in the US. Innovation, competition, lower costs, thanks to IP. Learn more at phrma.org/IP works wonders.
I think I just won my taxes.
Yeah?
I just switched to H&R Block in about 1 minute. All I had to do was drag and drop last year's return into H&R Block, and bam, my information is automatically there.
So I don't have to go digging around for all my old papers to switch?
Nope.
Sounds like we just leveled up our tax game.
Switching to H&R Block is easy. Just drag and drop your last return. It's better with Block.
Our esteemed fill-in guest and tech writer extraordinaire for Slate, Nitish has written, BuzzFeed is the defining American digital media empire of the Obama years. That's right up top on your BuzzFeed piece, but I want you to start there and talk about why BuzzFeed was so defining, because it's sort of dribbled off in a way before we get to this Hail Mary that they're throwing with AI. But what drew you to BuzzFeed? Why was it so defining of a certain moment in the history of the web? What changed? What got it into trouble? And what's it trying to do to make itself relevant again? Go.
Yeah, I like that setup. The reason I said that is from what I remember, especially in like my college years, I once I was interviewing for a local internship, and one of the questions that the interviewers asked me was what news sites I read, and I put out a few, I think, including Slate at the time, and they were like so relieved that I didn't say BuzzFeed, and they told me that to my face, because that was like the one thing that everyone like had a take on, everyone was sharing on Facebook in some way, shape, or form. And that, yeah, whether it was a quiz or a GIF or the dress, like it was
64 owls that are angry at you.
Exactly. Yeah. Like it was to the point. I mean, yeah, the whole clickle ethos started as like a way to make fun of the headlines and the constant like bait that you would get from BuzzFeed. But it also was irresistible, right? Like, I could thumb my nose at it, but I also bought into it myself. Like, yeah, did I do a couple of those quizzes? I absolutely did.
Well, there was also good reporting on BuzzFeed for a certain period, right?
No, I mean,
it was like you got drawn in by the 64 owls, and then suddenly you were reading some really well-reported piece.
Yeah, BuzzFeed News was absolutely fantastic, and I'm so glad that, a lot of the people who used to work there are now at places like The Times. We even got one, Sachi Cole herself, BuzzFeed alum with us, Ben Mathis Lilly as well. They both are excellent, and they also did pretty great work at BuzzFeed, despite, however many times their headlines were appended with, and we're screaming, etc. So, it is just like remarkable to me to think about in like the 10 years since like peak BuzzFeed, when every major media company seemed to be like investing in it or talking to like creators from it. Like the BuzzFeed alumni are everywhere. I mean, we've got Quinta Brunson now with like her own excellent TV show, but the site itself is just such a shell of what it used to be. Like, it definitely is nowhere near as culturally or dominant or even dominant in terms of traffic, discussion, zeitgeist, anything. Like, the web has definitely abandoned that like very bright clickbaity aesthetic. It keeps like selling off parts of itself or shutting down others, like BuzzFeed News is basically done for now. And yeah, like there's just no room in the current digital media ecosystem, I think, for something else like The Dress to really break through in a way that it did not that long ago. And so when I heard a little bit in advance of this like new social media company BuzzFeed was doing, it was really interesting to me because, one, I'm thinking like it's good, I guess, that more people want to do their own social media platforms. Like, it seems like people are very sick of, what's become of Facebook, Twitter, X, and Instagram, and are looking for good alternatives. At the same time, I feel like the news of BuzzFeed launching a social media platform would have been like massive a decade ago in a way that it just isn't now. But I'm still curious, like, okay, they clearly see this as their like route back to some sort of relevance. What can we make of that? What is their goal here? What can we actually see of that? Like let's take it seriously for a second. And I don't know, after reading this whole memo that they attached alongside the goals of their network, I'm not optimistic. I don't think BuzzFeed is coming back to its glory days anytime soon.
Yeah, Nitish, about this site that they're talking about launching, the new, social media platform, I'm interested in a couple things about it. For one thing, I wanted to remark that the name BF Island, I guess, from BuzzFeed Island is just the worst name. I guess it could also be Best Friend Island.
Or like Boyfriend Island, like, yeah, some weird reality show.
It just sounds like a really sad sort of, I'm picturing like a meta-style animation, of some sort of sad, pixelated floating island in the middle of nowhere. But what they've said, what Jonah Peretti, the CEO of BuzzFeed, has said in his memo about this platform they want to build, is that they want it to be less toxically masculine.
Right.
Than they feel like, not just feel like, it's pretty observable, right, that this very testosterone-driven ethos has now taken over platforms like X. So they want to create a space that's friendlier to women and gay people. And I'm just curious, I don't know, like how that sits with you. That just feels so ghettoizing to me, even as somebody who might be turned off by the toxicity of current platforms. I don't want to go off to some little BF island that was created for me and my gay friends. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so interesting what he chooses to focus on here, where he like blames desire. Like the whole memo, the TLDR of it basically is that increasingly sophisticated algorithms spurred on by like TikTok, Facebook, etc., have just incentivized like rage bait and things that earn negative attention constantly. And because that's come to dominate our social media environment, it means that everyone who participates in social media, which is basically everyone these days, has to respond accordingly and navigate that, which means they also get louder and angrier in their messaging. And then that spurs other people to get louder and angrier. And this is a thing on, all sides. And so with the new social media network he's planning, he doesn't want AI to be used in like sophisticated algorithms that just feed you like 50 Joe Rogan videos. It's going to be more like AI is some sort of supplement for you on this digital island where you can play around, make some quizzes or images if you'd like, and just share them with folks that you would, I guess, presumably find organically as you're stumbling across this island. I don't know. That's another thing with this memo is that it's not very big on specifics. They're still like building it right now, and there will be like a beta stage and everything, but there's no real understanding, one, of like what then like would actually draw people to this place, and two, the fact that it's not just TikTok algorithms that spurred our rage in our society. People were plenty angry and yelling on Facebook even when like they were looking at recipe videos from BuzzFeed alongside it, and that to me just feels like such a fundamental misunderstanding of how social platforms operate, how people like actually get angry and spread information or misinformation, and what they actually want from their like online platforms, that I have very little confidence in this mission. I mean, if they pull it off, great, fantastic. I'm just, I have my doubts.
Yeah, I mean, is there a single instance of, what amounts to a legacy brand from an earlier phase of the internet rebranding and revivifying itself? I mean, you've got these ghost ships like AOL and Yahoo that sort of continue to exist on the far horizon, kind of infested by rats or engulfed in flames, but otherwise non-viable, I mean, somehow unsinkable, but also non-viable at the same time. It seems impossible to imagine that BuzzFeed isn't in for the same fate. But it raises an intriguing question, and I'm curious to hear you speak to it as someone who covers the beat. You now have, and I think you're going to increasingly have, a large number of people, and it may eventually become a majority of Americans or social media users at least, who want to defy the broligarchy and do not want to be giving their information and their attention to these 6, 8, 10, or whatever it is, or maybe even 2 or 4, oligopolistic platforms. For all the reasons, they don't want to be fed the kind of content that they're being fed. They don't want to be vulnerable to misinformation. They don't want their own information strip mined by them. They don't want their creative output or even just their ordinary use of language in DMs to be turned into AI slop against their will. So there's this hunger for something not totally as corny and as kind of, clunky and clearly dead on arrival as the BuzzFeed iteration of this is, hypothetical iteration of this is. In theory, aren't they onto something? And then the question is, well, how would like Blue Sky is the closest, but right now Blue Sky by the standards of these other platforms is still, even with 30 plus million users, is still insular largely. How do you go about creating content on possibly the Wikipedia, Reddit, Blue Sky model, or a media company that on that model defies trends that are baleful well beyond just like a commercial context?
Yeah, that's a really great question and great way of putting it. And yeah, I really like Blue Sky, but right now it definitely is not what is very much missing, and what I very much bemoan is that, I mean, it doesn't have a lot of fun on it right now. It's a lot of people who are very concerned citizens who are posting about how the very real ways that the sky is falling, and I am grateful to them for that. But I also, I don't know, I like jokes. I like talking about movies and other things with my friends online. So that is definitely missing. And if there's a way to, do that on this island form, I mean, great. But yeah, I think you really pinpointed something there, Stephen, which is that the AI slop, like the playing into AI aspect of it, is kind of a self-defeating proposition. I mean, he's been, Jonah Peretti has been excited about AI for years and already has been including like AI generators for quizzes and whatnot. But like, we've seen that like primarily the main use case for AI, when it's not like surveillance or military stuff, it's like people making slop that then gets shared on Facebook and that like a bunch of your relatives comment on thinking it's real. And I don't see a new like playground for people to just play with and make more AI slop as in any way helping to detoxify the social media experience. If anything, it just seems it has the potential to make it even worse, because now you can just ramp up the pace at which you generate misinformation or rage bait or, or just like a completely fake image that you want to like pass off as real on another social platform, or even I don't know, like if we're talking about creative generative AI, I mean, at this point, like libraries are already stocking books that were made with generative tools. So that to me just feels like a self-sabotage right there, because I think there are a lot of people who do not want to be filled with, who do not want to be bombarded with AI slop all the time. And it would be nice for them to have a place that doesn't have that. And yet the defining feature of this place is that it has that.
Yeah, it's almost Nitish, like once the AI Pandora box has been opened, social media is done for, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like it's out there. It can't be put back in the box. And as a result, all kinds of slop and misinformation is going to be circulating in any network that's created, whether it's created like this one is being to kind of to favor those tools or not.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It's dark.
Yeah. It's like AI can be used for funny and interesting things. You know, I've seen it before, but let's be honest, when you give a bunch of people space with these tools, what are they going to be doing but trolling with it? It's just kind of the rule of the internet. And even if your platform doesn't have like incentives for them to share it nonstop, another platform does. Like, just take a look at YouTube recently.
All right. Well, on that happy note, actually, we will end on a happy note, which is that Nitish's piece is up on Slate from February 11th. BuzzFeed is launching a new social media network. Why? Why indeed?
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
All right, now is the moment in our show when we discuss business. Dana, what's up?
It is indeed that moment, and our only piece of business is to tell you about our Slate Plus bonus episode, which comes up for Slate Plus members separately in their feeds from the main show now. Today, all three of us, me, Steve, and Nitish, will have a spoiler-filled conversation about the latest episode of Severance. Our conversation about Severance was great fun, but it contained a lot of tiptoeing around hot spots because there are so many big reveals in the second season. So we can get into all of those in a free-flowing conversation in our Plus segment. If you're a member of Slate Plus, you'll hear that in a separate segment on your feed. And if you're not, you can sign up and become one at slate.com/cultureplus. There are many great benefits to becoming a Slate Plus member. You get bonus segments like the one I just described on lots of other Slate podcasts. You get unlimited access to all the great writing and podcasting on slate.com. And of course, you hear ad-free versions of all of our shows. And most important, you support us, our magazine, our work, and the work of our colleagues. So please sign up today at slate.com/cultureplus. Again, that's slate.com/cultureplus. Or you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page. All right, back to the show.
All right, now is the moment in our podcast when we endorse Dana. What do you have?
I am going to endorse a podcast. It's rare that I add a new podcast to my listening list because I always feel like I can't even keep up with the ones I listen to already. And I also have all my audiobook time and music and other listening. But Steve, you asked whether I rewatched the first season of Severance. It's a good question, given that there was literally a 3-year gap in between those seasons, possibly a world record for the longest gap ever between 2 consecutive TV seasons. I did not go back and rewatch, but I did listen to the Severance podcast with Ben Stiller and Adam Scott, which is so excellent. Have either of you heard any episodes of this podcast?
No, I haven't listened yet.
So if you're a Severance head, this is the dream podcast. So Ben Stiller, one of the executive producers, and really, I think, along with Dan Erickson, sort of the co-creator of the show.
And he
plays
directs
the lead.
a lot of the
He directed,
episodes.
many episodes, including, I think, the first episode of this second season. I mean, it's them plus the principles of the show. They'll have a guest every week who's usually either one of the main actors on the show, or they've had the composer who was really, really interesting. They'll have some behind the scene person come on. As a finale for the first season, they had Jon Stewart, who's apparently a huge Severance head and is, like on Reddit boards, like working out his fan theories. They had him on. That was a fun episode. So first they'll have that guest, right? And then they'll have just the two of them, Ben Stiller and Adam Scott, kind of breaking down both what happens in the show and the themes and so forth, and also some behind-the-scenes stories. So, when I was talking about the snowcat going through the snow to bring the equipment, for that fourth episode, bottle episode, they tell those kinds of stories. It's clear that the two of them really love the show, have a huge amount invested in it, really enjoy each other's company. It's just everything you would want from a Severance podcast. So there's one for each week. You can go back and listen to the ones from the first season too, if you want. And the most recent one, about the most recent episode, had Michael Chernus. We haven't talked about Michael Chernus, but great, hilarious actor who plays Rickon, the author, the self-help author, right? In the Audi world. So funny and smart. He's a great guest. Anyway, the Severance podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, it's really good.
Excellent. Nitish, what do you have?
Yeah, that is a great endorsement. I'm so excited to listen now. I am going to endorse something from the now late Tom Robbins, who recently died at the age of 92. A very for a decent bit there, I would say 80s, 90s, like a very popular author, very hippie-esque, freewheeling, anti-establishment novels that covered such a wide range of topics and had very imaginative scenarios to them. And one of my favorites of his, the first one I ever read of his actually was Jitterbug Perfume, which was published in 1985. And gosh, I truly don't know how to sum up any of his books, but basically, if I had to try to make a succinct summary here, there is a through line across centuries involving a perfume recipe, the titular Jitterbug Perfume, that ties very old ancient royalty with modern day New Orleans business ventures. And it is just such a fun, fascinating read. I just have such a blast reading them in a way that I don't always get from just reading even your typical comic novel. Maybe the only other author I really have had so much fun reading is P.G. Wodehouse. But yeah, he's it's kaleidoscopic, but it's not esoteric. It's just there's such a fascination with little aspects of the world. He goes on these long digressions about what goes into perfume, and also about the power of beets. You never think that beets, the vegetable, are all that worth thinking in depth about, but he kind of takes it through, and you're like, wow, I have a new perspective on it.
Yeah, he's so playful. I've only read a couple of his books, but I love that you're endorsing him. But I think of his books, which I've read so long ago now, but as a little bit also analogous to Douglas Adams in the sense that they're really playful, goofy, kind of sprawlingly imaginative. You see the author thinking on the page. And like you say, they engage esoteric ideas, but in an extremely playful, almost kind of stoner way.
Exactly. So yeah, I highly recommend, if you haven't read Jitterbug Perfume, or if you're now interested in Tom Robbins, it's a great place to start.
Excellent. All right. Well, very briefly, I am going to endorse the Australian author Helen Garner. I previously endorsed a nonfiction work of hers called House of Grief that got published recently and quite beautifully in the United States. Companion to that was a novel also published in the U.S. and very beautifully by the same house, a novel called The Children's Bach. It's short. It's almost more a novella. Her powers of description are astonishing. A few words on the page and the whole world comes alive. She's a beautiful writer. Deserves to be better known. Helen Garner, The Children's Bach. Nitish, thank you so much for coming on the show and filling in for Julia.
Thanks for having me. I always love being on the show.
Excellent. Thanks, Dana.
Thanks, Steve.
You'll find links to some of the things we talked about today at our show page. That's at slate.com/culturefest, and you can email us at culturefest@slate.com. Our producer and researcher is Victoria Whitley-Berry. Our introductory theme music is by the composer Nicholas Patel. For Dana Stevens and Nitish Pawa, I'm Stephen Metcalf. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you soon.
There are some things you wouldn't mind being stuck with, like a large unexpected inheritance. An always on the verge of death phone that has to be plugged in just right so it charges is not one of those things. Switch to Verizon and we'll pay off your old phone, up to $800 via prepaid MasterCard, so you can get a new one. Just trade in any phone from our top brands on any unlimited plan. With new line on My Plan. Additional terms apply for trade-in and pay off your phone offer. See Verizon.com for details.